Don't you read the news? Don't you know the score? How can you sing when so many others grieve? People say to me, what kind of fool believes that?
Welcome everyone. This evening we encourage you to, as the music is playing, to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from. We'll be doing that for a few minutes as music's playing.
A fool such as I, who sees a song as somewhere to begin. A song is somewhere to begin. The search for something worth believing in.
Not in the chat.
If changes are to come, there are things that must be done, and a song is somewhere to begin. Oh, you gotta be crazy. How can you
Again, welcome everyone. As you join us, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. Just let us know who you are, where you're from.
Don't you know the score? How can you dream when so many others grieve? People say to me,
I also encourage you to mute yourself as you join.
Who believes that a dream will make a difference in the end? By way of a reply, I say a fool such as I, who sees a dream as somewhere to. A dream is somewhere to begin. The search for something worth believing in. If changes are to come, there are things that must be done, and a dream is somewhere.
Again, if you've just joined us, we encourage you to introduce yourself in chat and be sure that you are muted.
Oh, you gotta be crazy. How can you love in times like these? Don't you read the news? Don't you know the score? How can you love when so many others grieve? People say to me, what kind of fool believes that love will make a difference in the end? By way of a reply, I say a fool such as I, who sees a love as somewhere to begin. Love is somewhere to begin. The search for something worth believing in. If changes are to come, there are things that must be done, and love is somewhere, and a dream is somewhere, and a song is somewhere to begin.
Guard me against all danger, O God. Accept me graciously, O King of Kings. Release me from my sorrows, which hold me as ropes hold a calf. Eyes without the power of your love. Guard us against the grief that haunts the life of the selfish. Lead us from darkness into light. We will sing of your love as it was sung of old. Your laws change not, but stand like the mountains. Forgive me all the mistakes I've committed. Many mornings will dawn upon us again. Guide us through them all, O Lord of love.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for that prayer. My name is Adrienne. I'm on the steering committee of Third Act Faith, and we're delighted to have you all with us this evening. It is the first day of spring, I was just reminded. Tonight, we're pleased to have Brian McLaren with us, followed by a conversation between Brian and Bill McKibben. We'll have a chance then to ask a few questions of them, and then please put any questions you have into the chat, and there will be someone monitoring the chat and identifying the questions and bringing them to the fore. After that, we hope to have some time, I have to put on my glasses here, to practice one of Brian's exercises that he had recommended to us, which I think will really galvanize our efforts for this evening and our work going forward. So welcome, everyone. It's a thrill to see us represented coast to coast, and I am anticipating a wonderful evening with us all. I'm now going to turn it over to Rua to help center us for the evening's presentation.
Thanks, Ace. I appreciate that. I'm going to share a painting by my good friend Mary Coelho. It's a painting called The Hydra and Other Delicate Species. And I'm sharing this for you to view while I share this centering, and I hope that it may draw you into new, wonderful worlds. It matters what stories we use to make sense of the world. This is what Merlin Sheldrake wrote in his beautiful book, Entangled Life. And it's inspired me to focus on stories as the theme of today's centering. Sheldrake also writes, might there be ways to make sense of fungi by loosening our grip on our humanness, of finding in our humanness of something else, something fungal. With these thoughts, he's guiding us to a story of the world that holds miracles and encourages us to recognize that all that lives is kin. The story that has gripped our Western world thinking has spiraled us into alarming rates of consuming the natural world because we believe that nature belongs to us. Isn't it time to change that story, to hold ourselves responsible for giving back what we've taken, to live a life of regeneration? How do we learn to create and live such a story? Ritual, nature, and the lives of many humans have shaped my attempt to live into a right living story. One human who's inspired me is Thomas Berry, a Catholic priest and geologian who guides us to a new story in his book, The Dream of the Earth. It's a story where we belong in the universe, and more than belonging, that we are embedded in that story of the universe. The story's not stuck in a story about today. It's a story of potential and fulfillment. Sister Miriam McGillis of Genesis Farm, a friend of Thomas Berry's, created a ritual that allows us to experience the deep mystery of the universe called the Cosmic Walk. She says it's a story of the universe, a story of the earth, a story of the human, a story of you and me. Teaches us that the birth of the universe is also our birth, because every atom of our being was there in the beginning. I've participated in earth rituals with Starhawk, an eco-pagan who's inspired millions to adopt a new story and vision. She combines social justice issues with a nature-based spirituality that begins by spending significant time with the natural world. She says the outdoor experience can open our understanding on deeper and more subtle levels, where the natural world will speak to you and to me. My friend Stephanie Kaza, a Buddhist and scholar, encourages us in her book, Mindfully Green, to participate in a ritual called the Council of All Beings, where participants spend time in nature to seek a spirit guide from the natural world. And when they returned to the whole group, they allowed the spirit guide to actually speak through them. This powerful ritual can open the participant to see with new eyes the intelligence of all life. And in the book Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul by Celtic spirituality scholar John Philip Newell, we read these insightful words. Deep in wisdom tradition is the belief that just as new life arises from the earth every spring, so new vision is forever trying to come forth from the human soul. Anything that is of God, even though pushed to the ground, will come forth again. Anything that is true, anything born of love and compassion, anything filled with true vision for justice will rise again. Take a few moments to consider what your guiding story is, and then I'll close and say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rua. It's now my distinct honor to introduce and welcome Brian D. McLaren, who is an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian. A former college English teacher and pastor, he is a passionate advocate for a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good. He is a core faculty member and dean of faculty for the Center for Action and Contemplation, and a podcaster with Learning How to See. He is also an Auburn Senior Fellow and is a co-host of Southern Lights. His newest books are Faith After Doubt and Do I Stay Christian? His next release, Life After Doom, Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart, is available for pre-order now and will be released in May 2024. Please join me in welcoming Brian to our program this evening.
Thank you, Adrienne. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to see you all. Hey, before I begin, could I encourage you to go up and hit that gallery view and just take a look at the other folks who are scroll through those different screens and see the other people who you are sharing this evening with. We have people from around the country and elsewhere, and just great to see all of you. I'm a fan of your work and honored to be invited to be with you. I'm going to share my screen and let's see if we can get going here. Very good. So I would like to talk to you this evening about the external issue of climate change and the internal climate change that all of us are experiencing. This sense that what's going on in the outer environment in some way affects what goes on in the inner environment, and then what happens in the inner environment affects what happens in the outer environment. And I would think that a group of people who are part of a group like Third Act want to make a big change in the external environment. But I would think that especially folks interested in faith and spirituality understand the importance of monitoring and caring for the inner climate, the inner environment as well. When we think about the inner environment, I just want to help us think for a couple of minutes about what it means to be these embodied creatures that we are. If you're a typical male human being, you have about 36 trillion human cells. A typical female, about 28 trillion. a 10-year-old child would have about 17 trillion. This always is a little strange to think about, but there's probably a little more than that number of we could call them guest cells of different creatures, bacteria, viruses, and so on, that live within us as part of us, something that I think we're just beginning to realize. We ourselves are an environment. We're like a civilization, a whole ecosystem within our skin. These trillions of human cells are organized in 11 organ systems. It's kind of interesting. We use the word organize, and it really builds from this idea of our embodiment and our interconnection. 11 organ systems that organize 78 different organs. And I'd especially like us to think about how we manage this complex civilization of cells. And I'm going to give you a metaphor to play with and think about. And it's going to be the metaphor of our brain and our nervous system as kind of the board of directors. I was a pastor for 24 years, and for the last 18 years or so, I've worked as a writer and public speaker. I speak to a lot of clergy and spiritual leaders. I come from a Christian background, but I'm involved in a lot of interfaith and interspiritual work as well. And so much of the language in religious communities that we use to describe ourselves, it has rich, deep meaning for many of us and is problematic as well. And so I'm kind of looking for fresh metaphors to help us understand what happens inside of us. There's been a lot of different ways that we try to talk about the brain. People who know a lot about the brain, who've spent their whole lives trying to understand the human brain, and of course, the mystery of consciousness, they tell us that this is the great irony. We can fill shelves and shelves and shelves with the results of our research and our best understanding, but the mystery of how we are conscious of ourselves is still a black box for our understanding. Lots of theories, but and lots of metaphors or models. We know all of them are incomplete. So this is just a metaphor, but I think it could be helpful for us in thinking about the monitoring and curation and loving management of our own inner environment that can help us show up for what's going on in the world outside of us. You probably have heard in the past a three-part way of explaining the human nervous system. You begin with a reptilian brain, upon which is built a mammalian brain, and then the human brain or neocortex. And that's there are limitations to this framework, but one of the limitations is imposed upon it when we take the term reptilian brain and use it only in a negative sense. We say reptilian brain is fear and anger and lust and greed and that sort of thing. Let me offer a slight modification. Let's think about that most basic part of our brain as the survival committee, composed of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of cells. It's not only the deepest part of our brain, but it includes our nervous system. And you have to picture the nervous system going out into every part of your body. There is no you without that nervous system and that brain connected to the entire nervous system. It helps you survive. And so when you think about fear, fear can be a problem, but fear is also necessary to help us survive. When you think about anger, anger can be a problem. Anger is also necessary for us to survive. It involves hunger. It involves alertness. It involves physical prowess and skill. That survival committee is a deep, deep part of who we are. And then what people call the mammalian brain, when you think about how mammals evolved, the central idea of a mammal is that a baby comes from its mother. And so there is this primal bond of protection between mothers and their offspring. And in many species, fathers are deeply involved. And so now, because everyone has a mother, and to the degree we're involved with the nurture to keep our species going, now this belonging committee becomes really important. It helps us monitor our connections to other people. It helps us monitor our affections. It also helps us keep track of who's on our team, who's on some other team, who is a companion, who might be a rival or a threat. All of that is part of this belonging committee.
Shea and Walsh do the dirty work, and here's that shot I was talking about. That one dribble.
Sorry, I think we got that. If everyone can be sure you're on mute, that'll help us. And then the neocortex part of our brain, a lot of people in the past have thought of this as rationality, but it's so much more than rationality. Sorry, if I move my hands like that, I'll get a little falling balloons there. But far more than rationality, imagination, and the mystery of what we mean when we say a word like meaningful. All of this seems to arise in this part of our brain. And if you think of these as three committees, each with thousands of subcommittees and members, but these three committees form kind of the executive team and the board of directors of each of us and of every other person. And then to add one little layer of sophistication, all three of these layers of all three of these committees have what we might say is a left wing and a right wing. The left wing is focused attention. The right wing is open awareness. This goes back to our earliest evolutionary ancestors. When they were looking for prey, they needed focused attention. But when they were trying to keep aware of whether they were going to be prey, they needed open awareness. And these, if you take open awareness, focused attention on the survival level, on the belonging level, and on the meaning level, we're still just scratching the surface. But we have a little idea of what's going on in us every second of every day. And for a group like Third Act, where you are people who are paying attention and learning about the realities of what we're doing to our climate and the larger issue of ecological overshoot. And when you become aware of economic injustice, sorry, I think we've got someone unmuted there. We might be able to resolve that. And we understand the reality of bias and that frontal lobe of ours is not just rational. There's an awful lot of irrationality built into us. Whenever you get involved in political work and in social change work, you're confronted with this obstinate irrationality in people, that so many competing motivations. And then we're realizing in our context around the world, not just here in the United States, the allure of authoritarianism when people are under stress and constantly feeling the danger of ecological collapse, and then the threat of societal and civilizational collapse. Like when you think each of you have had to let your survival committee, your belonging committee, and your meaning committee begin to process this, and it creates all kinds of internal tension. And it doesn't just happen inside of you, but then you realize that you are linked to all of these other nervous systems. You're linked by your body language, you're linked by words and hearing, you're linked by writing. And then these days, with these little devices, we are more linked than we've ever been in so many ways, with a broader network of people. Now imagine information and counter information flowing back across the nervous systems of hundreds of people in your social system, thousands of people in larger networks, millions, and now 8 billion plus people. And then you start to get a feeling for what's going on while we're dealing with rising temperatures in our external climate. We're also dealing with deep and profound change in our internal climate. And that change can be ripples of anxiety, ripples of fury, ripples of revenge, ripples of hostility can spread out through every nervous system on the planet. But also perhaps ripples of understanding, ripples of deepening, ripples of reflection, ripples of contemplative and compassionate awareness can also spread. And when you're involved in movement work, in many ways, you're involved with letting consciously have changes go on inside of you that can spread to other people that and then can be amplified to bring change in broader and broader ways. And I hope for just a moment we can just let that settle in, that that's the kind of work we're involved with, work that actually ends up making new neural pathways inside of people, new negotiations between their survival, meaning, and belonging committees, new ways that people are going to have to relate to one another. And maybe that helps us understand why, as we're trying to make sense of this changing situation that in many ways we never would have chosen, um, that we have to now begin to monitor and curate what's going on inside of this corporation called you, this incorporated entity of trillions of cells and dozens of organs and multiple systems that make up you. When people have tried to manage or curate their internal climate, there are two main channels that we've done this. First is socially. We find ourselves gathering with other people, and we might not even realize this, but one of the reasons when we gather, whether it's around a dining room table or whether it's at a synagogue or gurdwara or mosque or church, or whether it's on a Zoom call with other members of Third Act, in a certain sense, we're trying to create circles of trust where we can, in some way together, tell the same story as we heard from that beautiful reading earlier. We can examine our stories and see what kind of stories we want to share in together. And we can, in a certain sense, create some ripples among our nervous systems so that we begin to align and work together. And then, of course, there's personal work that we do with this. I'll bet if you were to think back over the last week, there have been some moments where you felt yourself go into a red zone of, something was out of whack, something was way too tense, and you had to find a way to regulate and to help yourself get to a more centered, healthy, whole, intentional, non-reactive, honest place. And it was we in the past have had certain spiritual communities that really spread techniques of first gathering in circles of trust and sanity, where maybe a group of people would say, everybody out there wants to be violent. Everybody out there wants to be hateful. So many people out there want to pursue money as the most important thing. We'd like to create a different space here so that in our social space, the belonging circles that we're part of, we can together try to develop a similar kind of internal space. And as well, people would learn things they when they were together, they would learn things that they could do alone that would help them, spiritual or contemplative practices that would help them move back to peace and move back to centeredness, move back to intentionality, so that we can continue to participate in the movements that we believe in to create a world that we would want to live in and that we would wish upon our children and grandchildren. And so many of us in the middle of our activist work find ourselves needing as never before to mind our mind, to pay attention to our attention, to be aware of our awareness, to curate our inner environment, to learn that story that will generate some peace and joy, so that our board of directors, our internal board of directors, in the company of others, can be intentional about the kind of ripples that we want to spread out in the world, in hopes that they could be ripples of imagination and ripples of change and ripples of empowerment, ripples of openness to have some new neural pathways forged in us. As was mentioned, I've been for the last couple of years working intensely on a book called Life After Doom: Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart. And what started drawing me toward writing this book was something that I began to realize in my years as a pastor, and then in my years working with clergy, became even more and more clear. Yeah, I'll tell you a conversation where it became super clear to me. I was talking to a super gifted church consultant, someone who goes into churches and synagogues and other faith communities that are in turmoil, that are in conflict, that are in decline, and tries to help them face reality and make decisions about what to do about the troubles that they have. And he told me, he said, Brian, in every clergy's job description, there is this invisible clause. And he said, it's never written, but it's an invisible clause in every contract. It says, keep the people happy. And then he said to me, but here's the problem. Happy people don't change. If you want to be a leader, if you want to be a leader in a community to help that community experience change, you have the delicate work of introducing discomfort at a level that will help people feel enough discomfort that they're willing to change. Not so much discomfort that they panic and run away or shut their ears and scream, but enough discomfort that they are willing to now be willing to change. You've got to disrupt. You got to send some ripples into their internal board of directors and stir things up a bit if you want to lead people through change. And I realized that in my public speaking, this helped me understand wherever I go speaking, people always wanted me to leave them with a story that they would say, please end on a note of hope. And on that note of hope, I think for them meant, please make sure we feel happy when we're done. And I thought to myself, there's something tricky going on here. If I leave people happy, I'm pretty sure I'm helping them not change. This was intensified for me when I read the work of a Christian theologian named Miguel de la Torre. And Miguel talks about the problem of hope. He makes an audacious statement. He said, hope is what is given to people when they're being exploited. In other words, if you're going to exploit people, help them feel happy about it while you can continue to exploit them. Now, there's way more to hope than that. And in fact, some people now have become almost anti-hope because they see this downside of hope. But what struck me is that hope and despair, a certain kind of hope and despair, can create the same problem. They either can give us permission to return to our previous homeostasis of complacency and apathy. I don't know if you've ever felt this way. You're disturbed about the issues that we care about in this world. And then you look for some good stories so that something inside you says, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay. I don't have to do anything. But maybe there are times where you begin to lose hope and you're in this disturbed state where your hope isn't so strong. I find in myself, and I see it in other people, this pull to say, oh, it's hopeless. There's nothing we can do. We might as well give up. And what strikes me about either extreme is that either allows me to lose my agency. And here's the irony. If enough of us lose our agency, the worse outcomes that none of us want are more and more likely to happen. That's why I was deeply inspired by a statement of Václav Havel, the great Czech poet and playwright and former head of state. This is a slight paraphrase, but he said, hope is not the certainty that things will turn out as we wish, but the conviction that some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out. And I've become more and more convinced first, just through monitoring, curating my own internal board of directors, even more through my work with the Center for Action and Contemplation, which is a place where we try to help activists learn how to do that contemplative work of self-curation and self-management, and help contemplatives bring their centeredness into action in the world. Through that work, I've realized that this conviction is something that we need to develop. I think in the 20th century, writer of doom really was Tolkien. If you've read closely Lord of the Rings, you know that Tolkien um, uh, he lived through 2 world wars, and he carried within him this sense of how horribly things could go wrong. And there's a passage in Return of the King. You'll remember that Frodo and Sam are making their way to Mount Doom. They're going to face the possibility that all of our efforts could fail. And Sam says to himself, so that was the job I felt I had to do when I started, to help Mr. Frodo to the last step and then die with him. Well, if that is the job, then I must do it. Now, what I love is what comes next. But even as hope died in Sam, or seemed to die, it was turned to a new strength. Sam's plain hobbit face grew stern, almost grim, as he felt through all his limbs a thrill, as if he were turning into some creature of stone and steel that neither death nor weariness nor endless barren miles could subdue. And with this new sense of responsibility, he brought his eyes back to the ground at hand and studied his next move. And I remember the first time I read this and I got to that passage, I felt that thrill through my limbs to think, is there something that would give you the courage to keep going, even when it looked like all, quote, hope was gone? You know, I think about Bill McKibben, who worked for so many years to tell us we've got to stay below 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and then watched as we nudged above it a few times and then moved above it. And of course, last year, the Paris Agreement tells us we can't go above 1.5 degrees centigrade, and yet we spent last year above it. And what happens when people begin to think, oh no, we can't let this happen. Oh no, it's happening. I think we're reaching a place where we have to move beyond conventional hope because of its susceptibility to despair. And the philosophers can help us with this. If you take a basic philosophy class or an ethics class, they'll very often talk to you about 3 main kinds of virtue. First is rule-based virtue. Somebody who we trust, some authority figure, tells us what the rules are, and ethics is following the rules. Other people say, you know, that's that. First, a lot of authority figures have given us some unhelpful rules, and a lot of people lose confidence in those authority figures, and they look for outcome-based ethics, saying, if you want this outcome, here's how you need to behave to get there. And I think there's great value in that. I personally think that that outcome-based ethics have been predominant in a lot of our activist work. We say we need to do this to make this happen or to keep this from happening. And I'm all for all 3 kinds of values when they help us, all 3 kinds of ethics when they help us move in a healthy direction. But I have a feeling that we're entering a time now where we're going to have to lean more heavily on what Aristotle called virtue-based ethics, where what we say is not just what are the rules or what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, but what happens when nobody's following the rules we think they should follow, and when the outcomes seem to be kicked beyond our reach. I think there comes a time, and this is what happened to Sam with Frodo there going toward Mount Doom, where he says, this is what I signed up for. This is the kind of person I want to be. I'm loyal to Frodo and I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to have the virtue that brought me this far. I'm going to stay with it. And I think that one of our great challenges in this time in our struggle is to go deeper than we've gone before, to ask the question, how do I want to show up? However things seem to be turning out. What are the virtues that I feel are especially important for me to bring to the table? Now, I should say, we're often tempted when we identify the virtues for ourselves to wish that everybody else would have the same virtues we do. But it may well be we need people with a variety of emphases. And each of us needs to think, what is my gift? What are the special virtues I want to bring to the table myself, so that we can have a positive influence, so that I can bring something to the third act team and you can bring something to the third act team. And then the third act team brings something to the world. And so at the end of our session today, we're going to invite you to just see for what bubbles up from you when you feel what's needed in the world right now, what's being elicited from you, what virtues are needed in you to bring to the table now. What would be three that you would like to put up at the top? I'll just tell you, as a public speaker, I often go into settings where I know that there will be a lot of people there who do not want to hear what I'm going to say. And I love to open things up for Q&A. And very often I get people who are really angry at me in the settings where I speak. And so what I have to do is, before I go into the setting, I have to say, if somebody's really angry at me, how do I want to respond? I know I don't want to respond defensively. I don't want to respond aggressively. And so I'll think of some words that help me say, here's how I want to show up. Listen, what happens between now and November, and what happens in November. And even if the outcomes we desire in November happen, our problems won't all be solved. And so we're going to have a lot of challenges to our internal regulation. I think when we figure out how we want to show up, we can start thinking about how we want to speak up. And I just thought in closing, I would offer you two quick little scripts that might help you in speaking up when you decide how you want to show up. My friend David Dark says, you have the right to not remain silent. And in times like these, I think we have to figure out ways we can speak up. The first one depends on somebody around you saying something that you think is really stupid or really harmful or really backward or really counterproductive. Maybe you live in a situation where that doesn't happen very often. I live in Florida. That's all I need to say. So I get a lot of practice with this. And a little script I'd like to recommend: 5 very carefully chosen words. Wow. I see that differently. Wow is important because it says, I feel some emotion, but I'm not going to yell. Wow. Not you're wrong, you're, backward, you're uninformed, you're ignorant. All that will do is put my ego into conflict with your ego. You'll perceive me as insulting you. When you perceive me as insulting you, it will just make you be more resistant to anything I want to say. So instead of going after you, I take an act of vulnerability and I say, wow, I see that differently. Now, almost always when you manifest this courage to differ graciously, the other person will say, well, what do you mean? How do you see it differently? And I'll tell you, if you're in public, very often, the worst thing you can do is tell them, because if you tell them in public, they will feel obligated to defend their team and they won't even be able to listen to you. They'll be performing for the other people who think like they do rather than honestly listening to you. Sometimes it's right to go ahead and tell them. But if I'm in a small group, I'll very often say, I don't need to go into it right now. I don't want to get in an argument. But if you're ever curious and you want to ask me about how I came to see it differently and how I see it, please, give me a call. I'd love to talk to you, but let's talk in private. Because when a person then takes the first step to come to me, their nervous system isn't agitated with needing to be proven right or wrong. They're coming with a kind of inner tone of curiosity, and something beautiful and different can happen. One other quick one. This one can happen any day. Somebody says, "Hey, how you doing?" And of course, usually this is what's called phatic communication. It's just communication that we don't really even listen to the answer. It's just our way to say, "I'm here, you're here, let's talk," right? But a person could say, "Hey, how are you doing?" You say, "Hey, you really want to know?" And then they say, "Sure, I'd like to know." And you could say, "Well, I'm really brokenhearted because I think Congress just did something really, really dangerous yesterday, and I'm really concerned about it." Or, "I'm really enthusiastic because I just read this great article by this guy named Bill McKibben, and every time I read his Substack, it just really charges me up." And, "Well, what's that?" And in other words, you take the opportunity to report on how you are in a meaningful way. It can create a situation that spreads ripples through other people's nervous system that I think that can be a healthy thing. If you ask me, "How are you doing?" I say, "You really want to know?" These days, I'm super motivated and focused on imagining a new way of living, a new relationship with the earth, a new relationship with each other, and with the most sacred depths of our own experience. And then I think when we are choosing intentionally how we want to manage our internal board of directors to show up and speak up, I think we'll be able to act up in good ways. And I just want to say thank you to each of you for being part of Third Act. You're in a community that's seeking to do this kind of work. And a special thanks to Bill, because I wouldn't be doing this work if he hadn't had the courage to speak up and to show up in ways that invited me to care and be part of this with all of you. Before we move on, I would just like to close with just a very brief meditation. This is a little simple prayer that helps me begin each meal and begin each day and share different experiences with gratitude. If you'd like to share it with me, you can. But I just say, for this breath, and for this heartbeat, and for this conversation with you, these beautiful companions, and for the web of life of which we're part, we give thanks with all our heart. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brian, for that, I think, really potentially transformative invitation to conversation and reconsideration. Now let's expand that conversation with Bill McKibben, who will join us for 15, 20 minutes of conversation with you. And I again want to extend an invitation to everyone to put your questions in the chat. We'll have some time yet after their conversation to entertain questions from you. So I just want to encourage you to put those in there. Now, Bill McKibben will join Brian for a bit of dialogue, and he is the founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for action on climate justice. His 1989 book, The End of Nature, is regarded as the first book for a general audience about climate change, and he's gone on to write 20 more books, and his work appears regularly in periodicals from The New Yorker to the Rolling Stone. He has been awarded the Right Livelihood Award in the Swedish Parliament, which is sometimes called the Alternative Nobel Prize. And Foreign Policy named him to its inaugural list of the world's 100 most important global thinkers. So we look forward to the expansion of this conversation. Thank you, Bill. And
Jerry,
let's
thank
see
you.
where it goes. Thanks.
Thank you. And Brian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your life's work, but thank you for sharing it with us. And I desperately needed to hear that tonight. And I want to ask you, just to kind of take the analyses just for my own benefit. I badly need it. And sharpen it just for the moment that we find ourselves in, which strikes me as at least in my lifetime, an unparalleled moment, mostly because of the figure of Donald Trump and the kind of just pure hatred and bile and vileness. I mean, he who spent the weekend telling us that we faced a bloodbath if he wasn't elected, and who said that he didn't think that immigrants were actually people. My all the members of the standing committee in my brain just start running around in some kind of limbic craziness sometimes.
Yes.
And we've got 7 or 8 months where he'll be dominating the news, and where, in order to preserve the things that we care about, we have to figure out how to defeat him.
Yes.
But how do we do it in some way, I mean, that's as effective as possible without defeating ourselves in the process, without allowing him to drag us down in the same place, and yet without permitting ourselves to be so high-minded and whatever, that we don't take on the actual powerful Mordor that is, right there in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, 2 things come to my mind as soon as you're saying that, Bill. First, I mean, all of us, I'm sure we feel the same way. Last night, I happened to have dinner with a college professor who is from India, a Hindu from India, and he told me he lives in the United States, in Middle America, in a state with a lot of Trump flags and all the rest. But he said he calls his parents in India, and he feels like he's in the US, because he sees the same psychological processes going on there. And if we step back and say, this pull toward authoritarianism, and if I can use this, I don't mean this as a profanity. I mean this in sort of a technical term, but a pull toward bullshit. In other words, people who, they're liars, but it's not just that they lie. It's that they turn lying into entertainment. And so they in some way bypass however the other people's interior board of directors works, to stop caring about the truth. And all they care about is the performance of their champion or their hero. This is happening around the world. And I think part of our shock is that we were brought up in a society that had a rule-based ethic that said leaders don't act like this. And so we're sort of dealing with shock that the rules have been violated and there's nobody to enforce the rules. So these bozos and bigots and fools get away with all the things that they do. And that just upsets us all the more. And I think one of our huge challenges is to pull back and look at the big picture and say the conditions have been right to create Donald Trump's and Bolsonaro's and Modi's and all the others, and Putin's. The conditions have been right. It's not our fault, but now it's our responsibility to figure out how do we begin to change the conditions. And I think what that can do maybe is help us to get, I think it might make us be a little more crafty, in the sense of saying, if he's developed a technique of bombast and bigotry and obscenity and horror, and then the way it works is people freak out against it, and then that gets him more attention. Like there is some system that's working for him. And for us, I think one of our big challenges is to stop playing that game and to find, in other words, the stuff that's not working, we shouldn't keep doing, and it will make us try other things. Now, if all of us on this call knew exactly the other things to do, it still wouldn't change things because the conditions are right for all those other things to keep happening. But at least we can begin to promote some other options, and I don't know what they are, but I think deciding how we want to show up so that we don't mirror his behaviors is a big help. And I also don't think it means being calm necessarily. Like, you know, mockery could very well be one of the most powerful things right now. That silly little child is out being a crybaby again for getting caught for doing something bad. You know, a tone that has a sort of that might just penetrate things a little bit. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, I think that you've brought your usual clarity to bear, and I think that's absolutely right. Um, I mean, one of the things that one of the things I'm very pleased about now at Third Act is that we have, 75 or 80,000 people now ready to go, just doing the hard, straight ahead work of making phone calls and writing postcards and doing the kind of things that are sort of in the course of normal civic duty, and just in the course of doing them, I think is a kind of a stand for some kind of normality and lowering the temperature and all of that. And I agree that that uh, mockery is a certain kind of has a certain usefulness here, because I mean, in this case, he is the emperor with, you know, maybe not no clothes, but $400 golden sneakers, and um, uh, uh, but I also think that the one of the things that we've been trying to kind of bring to the table is an appeal to some sense of history too,
Yes.
um, and to say we remember a time when people didn't behave like this,
Yes.
and and it's not that everything was perfect in that time, and it's not that, but we know that we're capable of behaving differently than this in our, and I think that's I think that may be important. I think that a lot of people, I think the greatest danger is his uh, ability to normalize uh, what we really should think of as
Yes.
apparent behavior. And the fact that, for me, somehow it came home last week watching him make fun of Joe Biden stuttering, and then watch thousands of people at his rally just howl in laughter
Yeah.
at him doing this,
Yeah.
and just sort of think, this is not the world that we grew up in. This wouldn't have happened. We have to accept that we're here now and deal with it. But one of the ways of dealing with it is to say, this isn't, we can't take this as normal. Um, um, but it's a huge challenge, and
Oh
and
my.
a completely fascinating one. And I must say, I'm grateful in these times to have that experience of history. I think that one of the things that makes it so difficult for young people is a sense without that. I mean, if you have a N of 2 of presidents, you understand that Trump is a strange and bizarre character, but you may not understand just how out of the stream of normal he is. And I think that must be scary in a different way, to just see this as a not as an aberration, but as as just one of the possible ways that people behave in the world. So
Mm.
I'm I'm at a little bit of a loss too, but I want to tell people we've got a room for a few questions that Jerry will bring us, but I just want to say to people that I really hope that they read your new book. It is tremendous and
Oh,
important.
thanks.
And I'm really grateful to you for getting to meet all the people here at Third Act, in particular at Third Act Faith, who were one of the very first groups that got going in this huge nationwide thing. Because I think that they exemplify precisely the thing that you've been calling us to for a number of years. And without you, and without a handful of people like you who've been making this case now for years, I'm not sure that we'd exist in this way. So we're extraordinarily grateful to have you hear, and I hope it feels a little bit like home to you.
Very, very much so. Hey, before we move on, Bill, I wonder if I could just pick up in what you said about wanting of using history and memory of what normalcy is. To go back to that script idea, you think about the people in your influence. If we all just got in that habit of when someone says, "How are you?" we said, "Do you really want to know?" And then they say, "Yeah, I really want to know." And if we were to be able to work on some wording together where we said something like what you just said. I heard the candidate for Republican Party speak the other day, and I'm afraid of what the future will be if we are the kind of country that would elect someone like that. Now, when you say that, you're not asking anybody to agree or disagree. And what we're doing, I have never written a book on leadership. I don't think I ever will. And here's why. My only title that I could think of a book on leadership would be called Leading by Anxiety. But one of the ways that we lead is by helping people determine what they really should be anxious about, rather than all the false the things that are distractions. And for people to be able, I'm really anxious about what will happen in this world if we were to elect someone like this. It may be that would get farther through people's defenses than anything else.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Jerry, do you have you have a question or two else? I know we're kind of running. I've been babbling on here, so we're running a little.
Oh, I think we're doing well on time. We've got a good 20 minutes, so you guys can converse and we can ask questions and mix it up.
You go ahead and pose us.
Yeah, there's some in chat here. One is it's sort of interesting to note how actually we've heard very little about climate change tonight. And Cam Nixon asks, how can we bring the emergency of climate change back into the forefront in the media? And I'm wondering, what's your response to even the hope of doing such a thing over the next months? I mean, is it even time? Is it the thing to do? Anyway, so she asked that question. What's your response?
You want to go first, Bill?
Well, I will say that just strategically, I mean, Third Act did this. We did this. The two issues that we work on, obviously, are climate and democracy above all else. We worked very hard all fall and successfully on this huge drive to slow down the single biggest part of America's fossil fuel empire, this LNG export stuff. And one of the reasons we worked so hard last fall to get it done was because I had the strong sense that there was a closing time window for when it was going to be possible. I do think we're in that period now when the presidential election sucks all the oxygen out of the room. And that happens most times anyway. And I think it's going to happen double this time because Donald Trump is an oxygen sucking machine. He is extraordinarily good at making sure that we're paying attention to him at all times. So I think it's going to be difficult in certain ways to, although nature will of course do its best, and with the ocean as hot as it is and things, we're going to see more than the requisite usual number of unnatural disasters in the months ahead. But I do think that it is very important to be continuing to make the case as we go into the election about what an important issue climate is. For one reason, because it's incredibly important, and for another reason, because it's maybe the issue where Donald Trump and the Republicans are most thoroughly out of step with where most people are. The polling data shows an overwhelming percentage of Americans, including Republicans and including independents, are worried about climate change and want more action. And so this is the perfect place to highlight just how old-fashioned, out of touch, archaic that message is. I think that's probably the way over the next 8 months to try and bring this to the fore, because I think I think our media is going to be speaking in the language of election from now till November.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think that's exactly the strategy we should take.
Yeah. And it's third act actually that has prompted me to think this way, because I have noticed, in the last months that third act has picked up on democracy as a major platform issue. And is it kind of true that this election might be the most significant climate event in before us? And how much really might we ought to, in many ways, set aside our work and agendas and focus on this election as the single most important climate thing we can do? What do you think of that thought? Because I've been pondering that one for a few weeks.
Well, I'll just say, I think people who care about climate around the world are saying this election is the most important thing, and huge amounts of progress they could make in 100 different areas could be rolled back. 1 year from now, they could be harmed in many ways. So, yeah, I think that has to become primary, and I think groups, if all of us can remember that most people don't vote based on policies. They don't even vote based on parties per se. They vote based on the tribe they want to belong to. What identity makes their identity feel the best? And part of the secret magic, evil, toxic sauce that Donald Trump knows how to cook up is he knows how to bring people into a kind of a furor of rage and resentment and vengeance, and there's a certain high, there's a certain kind of dark effervescence to that he knows how to stir up. He gives people a good feeling. And if all we do is give people a bad feeling and don't give them something great to be part of, that will be all the more alluring. And that's why, Bill, when you were saying a few minutes ago about the kind of world that we believe in and that we look forward to invite people into a community where we care about honesty and decency and character and being concerned about our children and grandchildren's well-being and so on. We have to be aware. So much depends on people wanting to join our tribe.
And in climate terms, one of the symbols of that tribe now is the solar panel, which is a remarkably uniting symbol across a lot of political ideologies. The polling data all shows that Americans love the idea of clean, renewable energy, solar power in particular. And it's why it's, it's why when I don't actually like mocking Trump all the time, but I do think that it's very effective to point out just how silly his, windmills are going to give you cancer, an electric car only goes 10 miles, whatever. Just like, what are you talking about, old man? It's like this, that's not how this world works. And this is one of the places in particular, I think, where our alliance with young people at Third Act is really useful. Just to say, there are people who are figuring out how to do really interesting things in this world. We've actually got some momentum going in that direction now, thanks to the work that Biden has done around the Inflation Reduction Act and things like that. And it's that momentum that's going to grind to a halt while we have this, period of regression. So that's I think that's one of the ways to talk about climate. We're in a very, in one sense, an optimistic moment because finally renewable energy is starting to take off. It doubled last year in this country. That's exciting, and it would be a shame to just bring it to a halt because somebody who's deeply allied with big oil is suddenly back in power. That's one way, anyway, of thinking about it, I think, as we head forward.
Yeah. Marianne Holtz asked a question, maybe work for the defeat of authoritarianism and still remember the image of God hidden in even those we want to defeat.
Mhm.
Might we insist on their humanity even when they say others are not human?
Mhm.
And I guess this can also apply to the banks and the oil companies. What is it? Is there something in that question about how, our own spirit and demeanor and presence with others?
Yeah, as a Christian, I often think of Jesus' words about loving your enemies. And what I like about that balance is it doesn't say you have no enemies. It gives other people the right to define themselves in opposition to what you or I stand for. So to not pretend we all agree and everything's fine, but to say if certain people win, everything I care about, so much of what I care about loses, and I would think the world would be a better place if the things they're working for actually lose. But I still love them as human beings, and among other things, I would wish that they would be brought to a place where they could hear what many of us are trying to say. Yeah, it's I think it's a dynamic tension that we're capable of holding, and we don't want to lose either side.
I think it's important, and I find myself less and less and less able to hold on to it.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm grateful for conversations like this one and groups like this, um, because I sometimes feel myself slipping in this regard. And it's another reason why history is so useful to us, not just the history of the gospel, but the history of Dr. King and the history of Gandhi and the history of people who have demonstrated that it is possible to stand up to great evil and do it in ways that that not just preserve but enhance your own humanity and those of everybody else around you. So would that we could figure out some of those same things in this moment.
Yeah, connected to that definition of hope, I think but my hope is not to change your mind, that my hope is to be what makes sense to me to be. I think that's related maybe, so that we use rage, I think, to try to change the other. And maybe if our goal was more like to be what we're supposed, which relates to the question Dan Quinlan asked, when you're feeling down, what touchstones do you come back to find energy and joy?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a beautiful quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer. I should memorize it, but it goes something like this: that even though the world is broken, it continues to feed us. Even though we're assaulting nature in so many ways, it continues to bring us joy and beauty. So I would say, for me, reconnecting with that external environment and trying to bring my internal environment back in sync with that, and in a sense have the feeling that I'm joining with the world, the natural world, and the flow and rhythms and values of the natural world against this human constructed, artificial, destructive, right now super powerful, but ultimately temporary, because it will defeat itself and long term. That's why we're trying to help it be defeated before it causes the full amount of damage it will cause by defeating itself. Feeling that connection and alignment is what helps me. And of course, many of us would call that the spirit, the presence of God in the world, and to realize that that's the larger reality we're trying to be aligned with.
It's been a not a good winter here in Vermont, the warmest winter we've ever had. But overnight last night, unexpectedly, we got 3 or 4 inches of snow, and I went out this morning for a ski through the woods, and it was just turned into a bluebird morning with a bright sky. And I got someplace where the wind blew the snow out of the pine boughs, and it was just falling all around me like I was in a snow globe. And it was okay there just to stop for a minute and say the Holy Spirit is here at work, reminding me to be present and in place. And man, did that help. And and on that note, I have to leave you now tonight, Jerry. I think we're probably time to be beginning to move towards wrapping up anyway. But just from me, such extraordinary thanks to everybody here, and especially to Brian, and especially for a life's work. I have some sense of just how much it takes to keep doing that work day after day after day after day after day, as they all blend into one another, and to do it in the best of spirits. So, brother, such thanks. And from me, such thanks to everybody at Third Act Faith. You guys are truly, truly amazing. On we go. Peace out.
Thank you both for a fine and heartfelt, soulful conversation. And Ace, I guess it goes back to you at this point.
Yes, yes, it does. And I'm going to take one moment of whatever it's called, prerogative, to ask or say to Brian. I have this thought. Where is he? Did he disappear?
No, I'm
he's
here.
still
I'm
there.
here.
I still see you, Brian. Okay. I was so heartbroken to think you had disappeared before I said this. Now, this sounds very simple. I think it's very simple, but I think it's something that people would really understand. You started your beautiful conversation, which I think we all appreciated, and it was so thought-provoking. But you started with this image of a mother, and the closeness of that mother with the offspring. I have 2 children on my own, so I know something about that. But also I like to include all the parents of the world and not just the mothers in this. But we all teach our children to be honest and decent and, lovers of life and curiosity, and to be respectful. And if somebody is a bully, we tell them, no, you shouldn't be a bully. I don't understand why the campaign slogan should be, if you teach your children to be good people, why would you vote for somebody like that? So I'm going to write that to the Biden people in the White House. And I know it's very simple, but I really think everyone gets what decency and kindness looks like, right? So that was just an aside, but we want to thank you so very much for the evening you've given us and your conversation with Bill. It really was so substantive, and the gravitas that we need here for what we're facing. And I just now want to share with everyone, before we turn to the last moment of the evening, with reminding you of a great exercise that Brian suggested. Earth Day, April. Programs are coming up, and somewhere in that long chat in the chat, you will find out that Interfaith Power and Light is spending a week of faith climate action work that you might want to get involved in, and so is an organization called Creation Justice Ministries. So if any of you want to look at those links, they will be in the chat. And now we're also really pleased to announce to you that we're going to have another, I believe, terrific evening on May 7th. So put it in your calendars, everyone. Most of you know Jim Antal, who's one of the members of our steering committee. He has written 2 really interesting articles recently about the sacred right to vote, as well as the idea of an election sermon. And both of those papers we've put into the chat for everyone to look at. And after that, We ask that you decide to come on May 7th to listen to Jim, and we will then have a panel of people from Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faiths in response to his ideas of the sacred right to vote. So I think it will be a really inspiring and helpful evening to help us do the work of getting the vote out there and getting people to the polls. Finally, the last thing I want to offer us tonight is something that Brian mentioned to us and about the dependency on virtue ethics. And he said, I'm going to read the whole thing. A hope that is not dependent on, quote, the odds being ever in your favor, unquote. He related this hope to Aristotle's virtue ethics and Václav Havel's definition of hope. Some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out. With that in mind, choose 3 adjectives, if you would. Take a moment now, all of you still on this call. 3 adjectives that describe how you want to show up for the ongoing struggle ahead, because that is who you want to be and how you want to live. In his terms, 3 virtues that you would like to bring to the world as we go forward between now and November. So please start adding that to the chat here, and you have all these great links as well in the chat for everyone to look at. Okay, I'm going to just start reading out some of them if I can. Honesty, presence, clarity, humor, curiosity. That's great. Integrity, courage, compassion, encouragement, hospitable and centered, compassionate, kind, faithful, empathy. I can't read that fast. And look at how many of these are repeating. I think compassion is a really big one. Yes, gravitas, humility, very important, humility, honesty, courage, humanity. How about persistence? For me, that would be one of them, to persist in this work and to do it in community. Energized, smiling, at peace, humanity, steadfast, patient, compassionate. Thank you all so much. I think with that, we'll leave the chat up for you all to keep looking at until we say goodnight. And I will turn it back at this moment to the closing music for this wonderful evening together.
Nations come, every nation come, all my relations under the sun. We are one, we are praying come, we are praying come. We are the song and we are the drum. We are one. We are the river come, we are the river come. We are the boat, the paddle, the shore. We are one. Many which only sing, many which only sing, many which only water is life for everything. We are the water, sing. We are the water, sing. We are the water, we are where all life begins. We are the ancient ones. We are the ancient ones. In your breath and bones we sing on. We are one. We are the meadow come. We are the meadow come. We are the lark that sings, the new day has begun. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the old and we are the young. We are one. Many which only sing, many which only sing, many which only water is life for everything. We are the water, sing. We are the water, sing. the thunder cries. We are the fire. We are the light in your eyes. We are standing strong, like a rock, like a stone, on the sacred ground we belong. We are home. Many Wachoni sing, many Wachoni sing, many Wachoni. Water is life for everything. We are the water, sing. We are the water, sing. We are the water, we are where all life begins. Way oh, way oh, way ah. Way oh, way oh, way ah. Way oh, way oh, way ah. Way oh, way, way oh, way. Way oh, way oh, way ah. Way oh, way oh, way ah. Way oh, way oh, way ah. Way oh, way oh, way. All my relations come, every nation come. All my relations